Let's solve this system of 3 equations and 3 variables. Let's start by setting up the augmented matrix. So down this first column, let's put these coefficients. So we'll put a 1, 3, and a 2. Down this second column, we'll put these coefficients. So we'll put 4, -2, -4. And down the third column, we'll put these coefficients. We'll put -5, -1, 3. Our equal sign, we'll put our vertical line. And then down the fourth column, we'll put those constants, 6, 4, and 1. So this is our augmented matrix. Now we're going to use the row operations in order to convert this matrix to the row-reduced form matrix. So let's start here. This 1 in the top left position, fortunately we already have a 1 there, that is going to be our pivot element. What we want, remember, is a 1 in this top left position, and then 1s in these main diagonals here, and 0s here, 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 and here. So we already have a 1 here, because I wrote it nicely, so that would work. So what we wanted to get is a 0 here, and a 0 here. Here's how we're going to do that, much the way we did eliminated the x when we had our Gauss-Jordan elimination. So what we're going to do is this. Row 2 is going to become -3 times row 1 plus row 2. Does that make sense? You know, if I want a 0 here, so if I multiply this row by -3, I'll have -3 plus 3 giving me a 0. So that's my notation down here. This row 2, I want a 0 here, so row 2 is going to become -3 times row 1 plus row 2. So let's do that. Let's take this -3 and multiply it through that first row. It's going to look like this. -3, -12, +15, -18, and let's circle this so we can find it here. And what I want to do is I'm going to take this new row and I'm going to add it to row 2. We'll do that in just a bit. Now we would like a 0 in this position, so let's take a -2, the opposite, and multiply it through that first row. It's going to look like this. So what I'm going to do here is row 3 is going to become -2 times our pivot row, row 1, plus row 3. So let's do that. Here's what it's going to look like. Everything in row 1 gets multiplied by -2. It's going to be -2, -8, +10, -12. And let's circle that, and we're going to add that to that third row. So here's our next matrix. Let's open it up here. First row stays the same, 1, 4, -5, vertical line, and 6. But now what we're going to do is add this row here to this row. So let's do it. Let's add this to this. So 3 minus 3 is 0. -2 and -12, -14, -1 and 15. -1 and 15 is +14. And then 4 and -18 is -14. And now let's get our third row. So what we're going to do is take this third row here and add it to this new row. So let's do that. So we're going to get 2 and -2 is 0. That's what we were looking for. Then we're going to get -4 and -8. Those add to give us a -12. And then we're going to get 3 and 10. That's going to give us a 13. And then we're going to get a 1 and -12. That's going to get us to -11. And there's our first matrix. Okay, so we've got a 1 in this top left position and zeros below it, so we've got a good start. Now we need to go over to column 2 and get a 1 here and a 0 here and here. So we want a 1 here, and the way we're going to do that is, this is negative 14. We're going to divide this entire row by negative 14, right? Negative 14 divided by negative 14 will give us a 1 there. So let's do that. What it's going to look like is this. We're going to take row 2, and row 2 is going to become row 2 divided by negative 14. So let's divide all these by negative 14. So we're going to get 0 divided by negative 14 is 0. Negative 14 divided by negative 14 is 1. 14 divided by negative 14 is negative 1. And negative 14 divided by negative 14 is 1. So we've got our second row. Third row is going to stay the same. 0, negative 12, 13, negative 11. So now we have our pivot in our second row. Right there is the 1. So now what we need to do is get a 0 here and a 0 here. Let's get the 0 here first. This is a 4. I want it to be a 0, so I'm going to take this 4, take its opposite, negative 4, and multiply it through this row right here, that second row. So row 1 is going to become negative 4 times row 2 plus row 1. It's going to look like this. Negative 4 times 0 is 0. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 1 times negative 4 is positive 4. And 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. So let's circle this. And then we're going to add it to row 1 eventually. Now, I also want a 0 here. So let's take its opposite, 12, and multiply that through row 2. That's going to give us 0 times 12 is 12, 1 times 12 is 12, negative 1 times 12 is negative 12, and 1 times 12 is 12. So let's circle this row so we don't lose it, and we're going to add that to row 3. So here's our next matrix. What we're going to have is row 1, add that to this new row 1. So we're going to get 1 and 0 is 1. 4 and negative 4 is 0. Negative 5 and 4 is negative 1. There's our vertical line. And 6 and negative 4, that'll give us a 2. Let's close it off. Row 2 stays the same. 0, 1, negative 1, and 1. And row 3 is going to become these. We'll add these numbers to these numbers here, getting us row 3. So let's do that. So what we'll get here is 0 and 0 is 0. Then we'll get negative 12 and positive 12. That's 0. That's the 0 we wanted. And then we're going to get 13 and negative 12. That's a 1. And then we will get negative 11 and 12. That's a 1 also. So we're making some progress. What we've got is a 1 in this position and zeros below it. There's 1 in the next position, right over and down for our diagonal, and zeros above and below it. Now let's go over and down. We got a 1 in this position. We don't have to make any divisions. Fortunately, we already have a 1 here. What we need is a 0 here and a 0 here. So row 1 is going to become our pivot row, row 3 plus row 1. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and rewrite row 3. No multiplications are necessary. So rewriting row 3, we'll get 0, 0, 1, and 1. And I'm going to circle that as we've done with the others. And we're going to add that to row 1. You know, I don't think I'll draw an arrow down there. That's going to make a big mess. I'll just remember to do it. Then, what we want is row 2, because we want a 0 here, remember, in row 2. So row 2 is going to become our pivot row, row 3 plus row 2. Now, that's going to look like this. That's going to look like row 3, same row, 0, 0, 1, 1, and I'm going to circle that. So let's add these together to get our matrix. So what we're going to get here is this row 1 here, these numbers added to these numbers up here. So we're going to get 1 and 0 is 1, 0 and 0 is 0, 1 and negative 1 is 0, our vertical line, and 1 and 2 is a 3. Let's go on to row 2 now. So in row 2, we're going to have 0 plus 0 is 0, and then that 0 and that 1 is going to give us a 1, and then this 1, nope, not that one, this one, and this 1 and negative 1, that'll give us a 0, and then 1 and 1, that'll give us a 2. And the third row, that stays the same. So we're going to have 0, 0, 1, 1, and now we've got it. We can read our solution. So here is, right here is 1x, no y's, no z's. So 1x is 3. So from here we're going to have x equals 3. From here we'll have the second row, we'll have no x's, 1 y, no z's is 2. So that gives us that y is equal to 2. And in the third row, we'll have no x's, no y's, but 1 z is equal to 1. So we have z is equal to 1, and there's our solution. And if we write it as an ordered triple, we're just going to get 3, 2, and 1.